Where does China turn to when they want to feed their people? When they want to advance technologically and militarily? They turn to us, the capitalists. We'll start at the top now with this NPR report by this Brooke Gladstone, who is a disgrace. Go.
Ghost, the manifesto is both impossible and imperative in its call for action.
Joe Biden, that's where he's gone. He signed on to Bernie Sanders' crazy 110-page Communist Manifesto that will absolutely destroy America. $4 trillion in new taxes, a Green New Deal.
China Mieville writes stunning speculative fiction, but his latest book, A Spectre Haunting on the Communist Manifesto, is a non-fiction rumination on that stalwart text, its place in the world, and how best to read it today. Welcome to the show, China.
Thank you so much for having me.
One of the few gripes I think you have with the book is that its authors are rather too admiring of the bourgeoisie. One of its most famous passages goes, "Everlasting disturbance and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with his sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind."
Let's stop there. This is a famous paragraph in the Communist Manifesto, and I don't see it as overstating the greatness of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie is the management class, is the landlord class, the landed class, you know. It's not the working people. And and there's been great debates on, well, is somebody in the bourgeoisie, in the proletariat? What's a dentist? Is a dentist in the bourgeoisie or the proletariat? I don't know. What about a doctor? Is that bourgeoisie or proletariat? He's not managing anything. Well, I don't know. So Marx was forced to come up with subcategories, truth be told. And the Communist Manifesto was effectively a pamphlet that communist parties throughout Europe wanted Marx to produce so they could distribute it. Go ahead.
It is often a surprise to the newcomer to the manifesto quite how much praise they heap on the bourgeoisie. It became very quickly evident in the revolutions of 1848 that much of the bourgeoisie of Europe was more afraid of the working class than it was of the Ancien Regime. Across Europe, the middle class made their peace with these old reactionary powers, and there was a period of immense reaction through the 1850s. If they had written the pamphlet even a year later, I think it would have had a much darker and more pessimistic tone.
Let's talk a little more about the text then. It is stirring. It scans. Some of its critics call that a weakness.
The argument is because this is written in such a style that is almost evidence in and of itself that its arguments don't hold up is straightforwardly absurd. And one of the things that has frustrated me a lot, one of the main reasons I wrote the book, is the lack of curiosity among a lot of its critics about the nature of the manifesto form itself. There is a notorious bit in which the manifesto says the working class has no country. This is often read as saying that the working class movement has to be internationalist, which is right, and that Marx and Engels grossly underestimate the power of nationalism. There is an element of truth to that. I think they were too sanguine about how powerful nationalism was. But what they are doing in that moment is grabbing the working class by the lapel and shaking them and saying, stop identifying with your countries. You have to be an internationalist.
Let's stop. This is nothing new. I just told you these pamphlet, this what it was is a pamphlet for revolutionary communist parties in other countries. And conservatives have been saying what? For decade after decade after decade after decade, this is an internationalist movement. It's not a nationalist movement. That is, that communism knows no borders, that it is spread through its ideology. So that's not new in the least. Go ahead.
nature of that sentence. And if you cannot, in good faith, engage with the way that the substance and the style are working together, and that sometimes a claim in the book is a prophecy or is a plea or is an entreaty or is an encouragement, if you can't seriously engage with that, you will never understand what kind of book this is.
It is exhortation, prediction, assessment.
Exactly.
Stop. It's exhortation, prediction, assessment. It was more than that. It was supposed to be a practical, revolutionary document. And here's the problem. After Lenin violently took over Russia, and keep something in mind, these aren't really popular uprisings. I mean, Lenin had about 20% of the population behind him. It's like the Taliban is about 12% of the population of Afghanistan. Mao did not have even half the population supporting him. And we can go on and on. In the case of Cuba, I mean, it was Castro and about 28 guerrillas who eventually defeated Batista. It was intended as a practical guide, and here's the problem. It doesn't work. So that's why you hear this specious argument that it's an exhortation. It is an encouragement. It is provocation, about what should happen. Now, what's weird about that is, obviously it hadn't happened yet. We're talking about the 1840s. That said, it was a complete misjudgment of humankind. A complete misjudgment of humankind. It's not that people like me don't understand that it is a futuristic in its propaganda. We got that. But we also understand how imbecilic it is and how dangerous it is. Go.
Let's tick off the three most prevalent arguments made by critics of the manifesto. The first is something called capitalism.
Don't you think that the critics of the manifesto should be participating in this discussion rather than one of its proponents? Go ahead.
Realism, the notion that it really can't be any other way?
Exactly. This is a term that was coined by Mark Fisher, a very brilliant cultural critic. And the interesting thing about capitalist realism is that all it requires is to disseminate the idea that nothing can be done. Therefore, even if you think that this is a terrible system, there's no point fighting against it. And this has never been more clearly put than with Margaret Thatcher's notorious and famous phrase that there is no alternative.
Notorious? She saved the British Empire in many ways. You can see the ideology here. This guy was probably a big-time supporter of the unionist movement, which all but destroyed the British economy, and then everything related to it. So go ahead.
Tina.
Exactly. We all call it Tina. That is the most pure propagandistic expression. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely vacuous and empty. Ursula Le Guin, the great writer, has a beautiful formulation about capitalism that its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings.
Hold on. Where does China turn to when they want to feed their people? When they want to advance technologically and militarily? They turn to us, the capitalists, don't they? And what they mean by this, the Margaret Thatchers and the Reagans and the Milton Friedmans and the von Mises and the Hayeks and all, is capitalism wasn't written down by one guy like a Marx in a book and distributed to everybody. People have written books about it, comment on it, good, bad, or indifferent. Capitalism is a natural behavior where people exchange goods, where people are motivated by a profit notion. Maybe it's bartering in centuries past. It's currency. Private property rights. People work hard and they are able to acquire property, a home, a piece of land, to raise cattle, whatever it is. That is a natural human characteristic. What is not a natural human characteristic is to give it all up to the state and then expect the state to redistribute it in some rational way. People who don't know you, you expect those people to be angelic to conduct themselves in ways that are absolutely without corruption. Even though they're no different than the human beings they take the material and the resources from. So it's not ludicrous. It is what it is. If you believe in liberty, go ahead.
On to the next argument, human nature. With regard to the manifesto, you quote biologist E.O. Wilson writing, "It's a lovely theory, wrong species." In other words, it can't work because human nature is just too base. I've changed my view of human nature from thinking it'll always go low to a belief that it's more plastic. It can be manipulated to dwell with the devils or respond to its better angels.
Conservatives often accuse socialists of having a dewy-eyed view of human nature, but to have a sense of the potential for a radical reconfiguring of the everyday. You don't need to believe that people dwell with the angels. All you need to believe is that whether people dwell with the angels or the devils depends on an awful lot of complicated circumstances. Capitalism is a system that quite explicitly rewards selfishness. It's hardly a surprise that precisely that kind...
Some people have argued that. But capitalism is a system that awards selfishness. Okay, let's say I'm the most selfish SOB on the face of the earth, and I want to make as much money as I can. How do I make my money? By creating something you want, or I don't get any money. And who's to say people on the dole aren't the most selfish people on the face of the earth, trying to get something for nothing? And who's to say those in power aren't the most selfish thing on the face of the earth? But for them, their currency is power and control and edicts and directives. How can it be that the great masses are corrupt, but those that manage to claw their way to the top are, as I say, angels? How can it be that they know what's best for the masses when the human mind only has so much capacity? It doesn't know what you want in your home with your family. It doesn't have any idea what motivates you, and so forth and so on. You decide what you want to wear, what you want to eat, how many children you want to have, if you want to have children, if you want to be married, if you don't want to be married, if you want to have pets, whatever. I could go on and on and on. The state can't figure that out, and yet you figure that out when you're making your budgets, when you're making determinations on what you want to do with your life, what you want to be with your life, what you want your children to be, how you want to raise them, and so forth. There's no substitute for that. I don't care. It could be a collective. The collective makes it worse. The collective is using limited information. I don't know how many more examples we need in the world of Marxism, neo-Marxism, socialism, big government, call it whatever you want. How ineffective it is.
For more, sign up for Levin TV.